Hello guys, you are welcome to my YouTube channel once again, and in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to model a simple ice cream cone and the ice cream itself. And now let's start. First of all, what you see in Blender is this cube, and we don't need this cube, so I'm going to left click on this cube and click delete on my keyboard to delete that cube out. Then I'll do Shift A to add an object to my scene. I'll come to where I have a mesh and click on cylinder. I'll click 1 on my notepad for front view, and I will say G to grab and Z on the Z axis, so I can move this cylinder upwards to this point. And I will say Alt Z for wireframe mode and click tab for edit mode. So now I can see through my object. So what I will do now, I will say Ctrl arrow to add an edge loop here, move it upwards a little bit, and Ctrl arrow again to add one more edge loop here. So I will just drag and select all this and say S to scale a little bit, and I will select this one also and say S to scale to this point, and I will say G to grab and Z on the Z axis a little bit. So what I will do next, I will say Ctrl arrow to add a loop cut here, and I'll activate this, and I'll say Ctrl arrow again to add another loop cut here. Just add 2 and move it upwards. So I'll do Alt Z back for my object mode. I'll say 3 for face selection. I'll select this face, and I will say I on my keyboard to insert. I'll say I again to insert, I to insert, and I to insert. So I'll select this face also and say delete on my keyboard to delete this face. So what I want to do now, I want to add what we call solidify modifier to give our cup thickness. So I'll come to my modifiers properties and say add modifier, and I will add a solidify modifier, and I will increase the thickness in here to 0.2, and I will say tab for object mode, and I will apply this modifier here, and I will say apply. So now I've applied the solidify modifier. Now I want to add what we call subdivision surface modifier that will give our cup smoothness. I'll come to my add modifier once again and say subdivision surface. So when I right click and say shade smooth, I will have a smooth cup, and I can add some details to the cup also to define some edges. I will say tab for edit mode, and I will come here and cage this so I can see my cup pretty well. So what I will do again, I will say Ctrl arrow to add one more loop cut. Ctrl arrow, add one more loop cut here, and I will say Ctrl arrow again to just add one more loop cut up here. And this is how my cup is looking. So if I click 1 on my keyboard, I can say Alt Z. So this is what I have. So I can say tab for edit mode. I think this is okay for the cup. So what I want to do now, I want to create the ice cream. It's very simple to do that. So now what we'll do, I will say Shift A, and I will come to curve. But before that, you can go to your where we have edits and come to your preference and come to your add-ons here and say curve. So now you can activate add curve tools after you check this, and you can say save and load. That's for that. And come back and do Shift A on your keyboard, come to curve here, and come to curve spirals and go to arc median. So now we have this note down here, so we're going to check this out and ensure your turns is at 5 and your steps at 24, and we're going to increase the height just a little bit, and the radius growth, so we can adjust the radius growth also like this. This is okay for us. So we can just make our tones to be like 6. Okay, let's leave it at 5 first. I think this is okay, and we can okay now, and we'll say A1 on our front view. I will say G and Z to move upwards. So what we'll do now, we'll come to this our modifiers panel come to where we have object data properties, click on that, go to geometry and come to bevel, and let's give it some depth. So let's just add one more to it. So this is what we have now. We'll select these vectors here. We'll say 1 on our keyboard for front view, and we're going to turn on our proportional editing here, and we will say G to grab, and we'll reduce this to this point so we can grab this way, and we're going to say Alt S to scale that so we have a sharp point. We can also select our move tool and grab also. We can move sideways, move upward, Alt S again to scale. So we click tab, and what we'll do now, go to edit mode again. Let's push this inwards a little bit. Just select all this and push them inwards like this. So now we'll bring in another circle again. Say 1 for our front view and say Shift A. Let's go to curve and let's bring in a circle. So I will say G and Z to move this circle upwards to this point. Then what I'll do, I'll come back to my bevel and say depth to increase the depth. So I can now say G and Z to move this upwards a little bit. G and Z to move upwards. So I'll select my ice cream and say tab again, so I can select all these vectors and push them inwards. I just select all these vectors and push them inwards also. I just take it a little bit outwards. Select these vectors and just bring this way. Okay, just push them. I don't think I need to bring them out. Just have to just push them inside. Okay, it's looking good now. So I can say 1 on my keyboard, and I have something like this. So what I will do now, I will come here and select this. I will right click on it and say convert to mesh, and I will come to here and say tab for edit mode. I will say 2 for edge selection, hold Alt, select all this edge and say F to fill. Click 3 for face selection. I'm going to bevel this face, and I will say Ctrl B to bevel it and add some loop cuts, and scroll your mouse to add some loop cuts. So now I can also right click and say shade smooth, also and say shade smooth. I can also convert this back to mesh, so right click and say convert to mesh. So now what we'll do, add the subdivision surface to it and say subdivision surface to make it more smoother. So we can say 1 on our notepad keyboard to view our ice cream this way. So what we'll do now, we'll add a backdrop to this scene. Say Shift A, come to mesh, say plane and S to scale. Just scale wider, S to scale. And we say tab for edit mode, 2 for edge selection. Select this edge here and say E to extrude and Z on the Z axis. So just move upwards and left click to activate that. So now we'll select this edge again and say Ctrl B to bevel that edge. So if you scroll your mouse, you can add more edge loop to it, and we'll just add few, and we'll say tab for object mode. We'll right click and say shade smooth. So now those edges are no more there again. So now we have something looking like this. We can see on your keyboard, so just click 1 for front view and say Ctrl Alt 0 to bring your camera this way, and select your camera and say G to move upwards. But first, I'll come to my camera properties here, and I'm going to increase my focal length to, this is okay, 67 is okay. So I can select my camera also and just move and adjust it. Just put it at the center. Now this is okay now. So always save your document. Ctrl S to save, Ctrl S to save, and I'll call it ice, cream, and I'll say save. So what I want to do now, I want to add some few material shadings to it, just to give it some feel. So it's very simple. I can select this and come to shading. But before I do that, I will add some sprinkles to our ice cream. So I'll say Shift A, and I'll bring in a cylinder also, and I'll make the vertices very little. I think leave it at 10, and I'll say okay. I can select this and say G and Z to move on the Z axis, and G and X to move on the X axis. Now I have to scale this very small, scale it very small, because to be our sprinkles. So what I will just do, I'll say S and Z to scale on the Z axis, and I'll say tap for edit mode. I'll say 3 for face selection. I'll say Ctrl B to bevel that edge. So you can scroll your mouse to increase or reduce the amount of bevel there. So I'll do the same thing now, downwards. So you can click slash to hide every other object, so you can work on it properly. Say Ctrl B again to bevel this, and I will say Ctrl arrow to add 2 loop cuts, and I will say G. First of all, I will off proportional editing and say G. Just push this way to deform it. Now I'll say tab, and I'll say Shift D to duplicate also, and I'll move one of it this way, and say S and Z to change the proportion, as in they should be vary. So I can now right click and say shade smooth, right click and say shade smooth. I can also add a subdivision surface to it also. So I have these two now, so I can select them and can right click. So what I'll do now, I will move them to top of my ice cream. So I'll just move them this way. So I can say 7 for top view, so I can see it properly. I'll just move it this way. Okay. So I can now rotate this and just push like this. So what I want to do now, I want to snap this. Let me select this and bring this way, so I can push this up and say arrow to rotate a little bit. I think this is okay now. So I'll come to my snap tool, turn on my snap tool, click on this and say face, and come here to say project individual elements. So now I can also scale this. So it is snapped. It is now snapped to the ice cream. So when I do Shift D, it's still on top of the ice cream, and I can still rotate it. I can say Shift D to duplicate also, and rotate. Okay, so after duplicating your sprinkles, we're going to off the snap tool there, and so what we'll do now, we'll just add some few basic texture, but we're going to rename our object, select this and say F2, and let's call this cup, and we can say F2 and let's call this ring. So now we can call this backdrop, F2 on your keyboard to rename and say backdrop. So what we'll do now, we'll select all the cylinder here because they are all sprinkles. We'll just select all of them, hold shift to select all, and we'll do Ctrl J to join all of them to become one mesh. And now they are one mesh, so we can name them F2 and say sprinkles. And now you can see, now we have our ice cream properly modeled. So thank you guys for staying tuned, thank you for watching. So kindly comment on my YouTube channel, share my YouTube channel, like, and don't forget to watch the next level of our ice cream tutorial. Thanks everyone.